The Earth is in a constant state of change. For 4.6 billion years, the continents have moved, the oceans have risen, the oceans have fallen, the atmosphere has changed, and the makeup of life on Earth has changed accordingly. During that time, we've had volcanic eruptions, we've had earthquakes, and we've had changes in temperature which have been related to the changes in the Earth. The Earth is changing now. It's constantly changing, and its temperature and its distribution of continents is also changing. But there is another change which is going on in the world, and one which has received very little attention at this time. The strength of the magnetic field of the Earth is changing. It is reducing at an accelerating rate, and the position of the magnetic North Pole is changing at an accelerating rate. In addition, the magnetic field of the Sun is changing. It is reducing at a rate which is known. In 2031, the Sun reaches a minimum in its magnetic field. That will reduce the protection the Sun's magnetic field has for the entire solar system. This means that more galactic cosmic rays will reach the solar system and will interact with the Earth. Coincidentally, the reduction and eventual loss of the Earth's magnetic field will result in a dramatic increase in the amount of galactic cosmic rays which intersect the Earth's atmosphere. Secondarily, the reduction of the Earth's magnetic field will allow more of the solar wind through into the Earth's atmosphere, which will take ozone and its protection from the atmosphere. This combination of additional solar radiation plus the galactic cosmic rays will result in major climatic changes on the planet. Our calculations indicate that there may be 7 to 11 degrees Celsius change in the average temperature of the Earth because of the polarity changes. That will result in major changes on the Earth, including melting of the ice cap, which, when it melts in its entirety, will result in a sea level rise of 207 feet. We can plot this on an infinity curve, the universal infinity curve, which demonstrates the changes over time from the Big Bang to the end of this particular infinity. Cut.
Hello, my name is Randy D. Moore. I'm a professional engineer in the state of Kentucky. You've just heard the fantastical claims of Dr. Derek Walton. Dr. Walton went through the different aspects of what a magnetic pole reversal would do to the United States. And this is a story about myself and how I discovered it on my own prior to meeting Dr. Walton, albeit on Skype. But he and I spoke about it. And then I'm going to introduce you to a Paul Downs. He is an old friend of mine. We've known each other for 2 decades. We've worked together on projects. I worked for him as a quarry manager at a newly found quarry in northwestern Alabama. And then we've worked together on other things, and he's a genius. He understands what's going on. But first, let me explain how I came across this. Me being just a mining engineer at a very large coal company in eastern Kentucky. The one thing that I did as part of my work was surveying, and that was just small jobs that we would do. Like we would find a homestead, we would take shots on the old house and old barn and things like that, and I would always correct them from magnetic to true north. Back in those days, it was not as simple to get on the internet and look up the magnetic declination. You had to write Denver, Colorado, and give them the longitude and latitude, and they would give you the correct magnetic declination. I also run across some of it in some old deeds, and I would get that information for the head surveyor, what the magnetic declination was, so that we could translate it to true north. And I became the go-to guy for magnetic declination. Looking at old deeds back in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s that we were used to looking at, and deeds for, at that time, the mid-80s, you would see changes in the declination measured in seconds of an angle. 1 second of one angle is 1/3,600th of a degree, or 60 parts of 60 minutes of a complete circle. Now, that's what I was used to. We had a family disaster, probably it was 2 years ago, in which my wife's mother passed away, unfortunately. And there were no siblings left, and the will and everything was left to my wife. We were unable to keep the house due to trying to keep a house in eastern Kentucky and in central Kentucky where I live. And it was impossible, so we had to sell that house. And I was mapping out the house, barn, cellar, just anything of interest as a handout to people who were looking at the house. And I put a paint mark down on the driveway, and I would do this over the weekend, so I didn't have time. And I was doing it with very rudimentary surveying tools that I could use by myself because I didn't have any help. And I would take shots on buildings and et cetera, et cetera. I remember 2 weeks ago in June, I put the spot down on the asphalt. And then I used Google Earth to approximate the longitude and latitude of that spot. Then I simply went to a page that would turn the longitude and latitude into the magnetic declination. So I got the magnetic declination, and I didn't think anything about it. I had been surveying so long ago, I didn't realize anything had changed. And we came back about a month later, and I thought, well, it'd be a good time for me to finish up this little rough survey. And the thing that amazed me is I used the same coordinates from Google Earth and calculated, on the web, the magnetic declination. I was shocked at what I found. looked back in my note. I had to go back to my notes to see what I had thought was to be something fantastical, because instead of being seconds of an angle of difference, there were now minutes of angles of difference, meaning that the magnetic pole during my lifetime had drifted amazingly far. And that, of course, piqued my interest. Once I get my interest piqued, I dig until I find out what the answer is. And I came across a diagram showing where the magnetic north is in relation to the true north. And through the 20s, 30s, and 40s that I was speaking of earlier, there was just small changes. And up until the 90s, the magnetic pole took off. And it became an exponential movement. And it finally became a linear function, but still it'll probably go back to being exponential. And it worried me. I began to think about, what the implications of a new pole would mean to this Earth. What would happen during the instance of time that it was moving real quick, and how it was going to affect us. And I realized that this was, it could be an Ellie event, meaning a Earth level extinction. And I became caught up in that. And I mentioned it to Paul Downs, we talk about frequently, whom you're going to hear next. Paul is an inventor. He is an entrepreneur. He is a friend of mine. And Paul said, "Oh, yes, it's part of the polarity reversal." And I said, "You know about this?" He said, "Yes, I've been trying to tell everyone and warn them." And I said, "Well, what are some of the, is there anything we can do?" And he said, "We've got to go underground, where what's going to happen is the poles are going to be removed for a moment, and cosmic rays are going to just strike our planet willy-nilly and create heat and create possible volcanic activity, create all kinds of trouble. But the big one, he informed me, is the Greenland ice sheet. Because cosmic rays do not travel. They travel through ice. They do not travel through land. But when they strike the land, they heat it up. So the backward solution to that was that the bottom of the Greenland ice cap would melt. Now think about that. The bottom would melt first. And what that's going to do is make it fluid. It'll become very fluid, and it will begin movement, quite a bit of movement. And I have looked at mountain ranges underneath of Greenland, but they are not enough to hold the entire Greenland ice sheet. And due to the movement of the Earth, the Greenland ice sheet will take off toward Nova Scotia and south and strike the continental USA. And the only saving grace from it taking a swath all the way across the U.S. is two mountain ranges, the Appalachian Mountain Range and the Rocky Mountains. Because when it hits the Appalachian Mountain Range, I don't think that it's going to go over it. It can't. But it will not stop because it's now fluidized and it's moving along, tearing up the ground and, just creating havoc. It'll begin to move south along the Appalachian eastern edge. And when the Appalachian Mountains run out, down around Georgia, it'll turn west again across the lower part of the United States. As it continues there, it will continue until it hits the Rockies. Same thing will occur. It'll go south along the eastern edge of the Rockies. And then from there, it's going into the Pacific Ocean. If there is enough left over after all that grinding away. But it is a major event, one that frightens me. For my children, for my grandchildren, we have to do something now. And at this time, I'm going to turn you over to Paul Downs to let Paul Downs close out this little three-person topic. And my prayers is for everyone in the United States, for myself and my family, and for everybody in the world, because this inundation of cosmic rays, when this pole starts to reverse, is going to be, like I said, an LE event. We got planning to do. We've got all kinds of work to do. We got to get underground to survive this. Because we don't want to let this wipe out mankind. With that, I'm going to turn you over to Paul Downs, my friend.
My name is Paul Downs. I am Chairman and CEO of ArrivalStar and inventor and Chief of Strategy at Muirfield Energy Technologies, which has perfected cold fusion of helium-3, perpetual, limitless green energy for the entire world. Antimatter photon lasers, from the antimatter laser, photon laser scalpel, to the antimatter photon laser that can shoot asteroids out of the sky. Teleportation. But it is none of these things that I'm here to talk to you about today. You have already heard from Dr. Derek Walton, the late Director of Earth Sciences at Muirfield Energy Technologies, on his presentation of the Polarity reversal. You're from Randy Moore, Chief Design Engineer at ArrivalStar at Muirfield Energy Technologies. But I want to take this backwards because we have to. In 1978, October the 1st, I met Paul Dirac at Florida State University. I was All-American on the golf team. I chose Florida State University over Stanford, where I was recruited, because Paul Dirac was at Florida State, and the golf coach, Dr. Don Vella, was a dear friend, and I was introduced on October the 1st, 1978. Dirac and I spent 5 years completing Dirac and Einstein's work dating back over 20 years on perpetual limitless green energy and more via cold fusion of helium-3. Dirac and I also completed Dirac and Einstein's work of quantizing the 10 fundamental laws of physics, which appear in a paper on the Muirfield Energy Technologies website. All very simple, beautiful formulae that connect to a date, to a very specific date. This date, 27th of September 2031. And above it is T equals MC cubed. Yes, time travel occurs at TMC cubed. The acceleration in the expansion rate of the universe, the cosmological constant, is inversely proportional to the speed of light in a vacuum. Distant galaxies pass through E equals mc squared, March 27th, 2019. All the distant galaxies you see no longer exist as matter. Pure energy traveling apart at a speed greater than EMC squared, approaching the speed of light cubes. All of the formulae are symmetrical and point to the same date. I am not guessing about the date. And this is our collective first warning to the entire world about the universal polarity reversal. And Walton pointed out the solar minimum also is on that date. And what happens is the cosmic radiation melts the polar ice caps. The world's oceans rise by 207 feet precisely. The existing 216 foot calculation is incorrect because 9 feet are taken up into the atmosphere with the higher temperatures. If the world takes no action now, billions will die on that date. The world needs to move to higher ground. There is time, but not much. Even more pressing, certainly for the United States, is the effect of the polarity reversal. As Dr. Walton pointed out in his paper, also on the Muirfield Energy Technologies website, that everything that you thought about climate change is incorrect. It is a precursor to the polarity reversal. But when the cosmic rays flood in, the base of the Greenland ice sheet is lubricated, and the Greenland ice sheet heads direct to Easter Island at vast speed, scalping much of North America down to the base layers of rock, guided only by the mountain ranges. Nothing can exist beneath. The whole world must pay attention. If urgent preventative action is not taken now, as I say, the end of humanity as we know it. But it can be a time of great opportunity to take the world into the space age and beyond to the time age. What is the point? There'll be nothing left. Very few people left in a post-cataclysmic world.